Hi there, this is Dr. Cindy Banyai, Democratic candidate for U.S. House of Representatives, Florida 19, and this is Perspective. For this segment, we are going to be talking about a sensitive issue, systemic racism in the United States. We need to overcome the divides in our country. Being honest about the racial gap is not being divisive. The first step in solving a problem is admitting you have one. White household wealth is 7.8 times that of Black households. Black life expectancy is 5 to 7 years less than that of whites. 34% of COVID deaths were Black people, despite being only 12% of the population. Black women make only 60 to 67 cents on the dollar compared to white men. This kind of equity gap goes on and on across multiple metrics all over the United States. This is not the failing of Black people, and this is not meant to deride the Black community. But this is a failing of a system that has been built to exclude and devalue them. Systemic racism is not about individuals. The system in our country are built by people and the values they hold, both obvious and hidden. Many government programs have criteria put in place to determine who is qualified and who is not. This is called means testing. Means testing is heavily influenced by the thoughts of the officials creating them and who they ultimately think are worthy of public goods and services. We see systemic racism where these criteria disproportionately affect or exclude a particular group of people. Housing redlining, for example, excluded Black people from accessing credit to buy houses. According to the book The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, after the New Deal, the Federal Housing Administration refused to insure mortgages in Black neighborhoods and subsidized builders of suburban white subdivisions that did not allow Black owners in. This is an example of systemic racism that was codified in the U.S. government processes by means testing. People can act racist in their words and actions, which is shameful. But systemic racism is embedded. It is the responsibility of all that government actions and public dollars provide benefit without discrimination by race. So, you may have heard some conversation about this thing called critical race theory. What's going on with that? Critical race theory is actually a legal field of study that looked at how racism was played out in the judicial system. Contrary to what some politicians will tell you, it is not taught in the K-12 public school system. In fact, the K-12 curriculum is driven by the state and local school boards, not the federal government. The federal government supports education through grant funding and the U.S. Department of Education, but that doesn't mean they necessarily have the final say. Recently, the Biden administration created a set of priorities for some levels of funding, particularly supplementary funding in U.S. history and civics education. This prioritization of grant funding looked at projects that included aspects that had diversity and inclusion as themes, as well as critical thinking, something that I think we all can agree needs to happen more in our schools and America at large. Just because a set of priorities looked at funding projects that looked at diversity and inclusion does not mean we are institutionalizing critical race theory in the public education system. In fact, it's a small amount of supplementary money that helps to promote that diversity and critical thinking. This is hardly a sweeping policy or even something that can be enforced on schools through the federal funding because it is opt-in only, meaning that projects that have these aspects and school districts that want to undertake them can access that funding. It is not enforced on our public schools. The fact of the matter is, this discussion on critical race theory is a fabricated crisis fueled by partisan politics. It is not the same as anti-racism or social justice or bias training in the workplace. These are not examples of critical race theory. When we talk about public schools, as a matter of fact, there is no way to force schools to teach anything from the federal level. For example, Hendry County School District in Southwest Florida did not address their desegregation lawsuit from 1970 until 2017, which left them out of federal funding. But that was their choice. Lee County School District was not declared unitary, meaning they did not complete the elimination of their dual system of segregation in the education system until 1999. That was a full 35 years after Rosalind Blacklock was denied entry to Fort Myers High School. And then she sued. The preeminent symbol of racism in Fort Myers, the bust of Robert E. Lee, didn't come down until 2020. Black and Latino students are consistently graduating at lower rates than white students across Southwest Florida. Clearly, we still have work to do. The enslavement of Black people was outlawed only 165 years ago. Segregation was ended by the Civil Rights Act, which was only 54 years ago. That's in the lifetime of many of the people who are watching this segment here today. We must continue to work towards equity. We must be honest about our history. We need to support funding public education and not erode it with cannibalizing for-profit charter schools. We need to teach science, accurate history, both the highs and lows. And we need to teach critical thinking, encouraging our young people and the future of our workforce to be able to problem solve and think on their feet and not be susceptible to partisan brainwashing. This used to be non-negotiable in American public life. It's time to put the false political charades aside and focus on what's best for the country and our kids. Thanks for joining us here today for this segment of Perspective. I am Dr. Cindy Banyai, Democratic candidate for U.S. House of Representatives, Florida 19. And it's time to go back to Lee Pitts Live. Here we go. I'm Dr. Cindy Banyai, Democratic candidate for U.S. House of Representatives, Florida Congressional District 19. I'm a teacher and small business owner. I'm fighting for the things we need: clean water, good health, and good jobs. I'm here with you and for you. Let's create a Southwest Florida where the sun shines on everyone. Send me to Congress to work for you. Check your voter registration and vote for me, Dr. Cindy Banyai.
I'm Dr. Cindy Banyai, and I approve this message.
Lee Pitts Live is a Lee Pitts Enterprise production.